Hello everyone. Good afternoon. At least it's afternoon where I am. I know it's evening for some of you. Happy Saturday. If you guys see me or can hear me just fine, just type in the chat box that you can hear me loud and clear. I just like to double check that the mic's working. So how did you guys find this week's lesson? I know there was a lot to do, and some of you tuned in this morning, so I apologize ahead of time for repeating myself on a few things. All right, thank you, Penny. I'm glad everyone can hear me. Okay, so while we're waiting for a few more people to come in, because it's not quite officially 2:30, I just wanted to talk really quickly about what you guys can expect for the next week and what we'll be doing for our next critique. So next week, well, the lesson that you guys have today in your student portal is a video on color mixing. I have a video lecture on color theory for skin tones. And be sure to check the download section under that video because there's some really cool handouts. And then you guys will be working on a color study and mixing up your palette for the large painting. So make sure, I'm pretty sure I said this in the video, but make sure you mix up plenty of paint and watch the video on how to save your paint week to week to extend the life of your paint and on cleaning your brushes as well. So for next week, we're going to be focusing our critique on your color study and your color palette. However, you guys have all of this week to also make edits to your underpaintings and kind of finish those up. So don't feel like you have to rush and get these done because we won't be painting on these until next weekend. So you have a bit of time to make some of the edits and develop some of the underpainting a little further. So that was pretty much it. And if you guys, of course, have questions, you know how to reach me through the forum. Has that been working out okay for everyone? Because before I used to do it through Facebook group, but the problem with Facebook is their algorithms, and I would miss people's posts or something like that, and now I get an email every time someone posts something, so I make sure I follow up. And it's been a little bit easier for me to keep track and make sure I get to everyone's question. So I'm going to go ahead and, okay, it's time. So let's go ahead and get started on the critiques. If you guys have questions about next week, just type it in the chat box. Okay, good. I'm glad the forum's working. I like to be able to have it on the home site anyways. It kind of makes more sense, and not everybody's on Facebook, so I kind of felt bad that some people were missing out on the forum interaction. And I was getting a lot of emails one-on-one, and it was really hard for me to keep track of 4 different platforms and make sure I got back to everyone. So this kind of streamlined it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Todd, I don't know if you're in here, but I'm going to start with you. So what I did today, and I know some of you tuned in this morning, but I did kind of 2 edits. I did a drawing edit, which is just linear corrections, and then I also did a tonal edit, which was more focused on correcting those line areas that needed correcting, but also focusing on building up a more finished underpainting. So I'm going to just start with these the linear edits. And Todd, one of the things I noticed was just a little bit here in the width along the edge of the face. It felt a little bit big for her. So I want you to bring that in, and it'll be pretty easy because all you need to do is take this darker tone and just glaze in about this much. It's not a very big difference, but it will help with the overall width of her face. The only other thing I noticed was here in the nose. It just needs to be a little bit more defined, and I think the shadow shape could go up just a tiny bit more. I'm going to remove my drawing edits so you can kind of see where it's at. And also just a little definition. So if your umber won't go any darker, you could always mix just a touch of blue, ultramarine blue, into that umber. Umber varies like brand to brand majorly. So I've bought some umbers that are really not going to reach that deepest value that you might need. So if you guys are encountering that, remember you can add just a little bit of blue to that to get a richer black if you find it necessary. I didn't find it with mine to be entirely necessary, so I didn't do that. But like I said, some umbers are kind of lighter value in general. So if you find you're kind of hitting a wall with how dark you can get it, and you need to be able to punch it a little darker, just add a touch of blue. So for the nostrils, that would maybe be a good idea. Just you don't want to go too heavy black, but you might want a little bit more dark in there so you can make some defined edges. And then here in the mouth, I just felt like it needed to be a little lower and also just a touch longer. You have yours kind of ending up here. That's just going to help lock in her likeness a little bit more. And I think it was the same thing as the definition within the nostril in the eyes. I felt like I wanted to see just a little bit more, especially on this right eye, a little more definition, either with a darker value for the lash line on this outer edge. It's kind of blending into this tone inside the whites of the eyes, so you might even scumble just a little bit of white in here to brighten up those forms and just make it really clear. I know you have these big deep cast shadows coming across her eye in this photo because this is a little different than the one I'm working on. But just so that you don't lose a sense of your drawing when you move into the color stage, I would go in and just define some of those areas. Hi Lynn, hi Stella. Welcome. I'm looking up every now and then at the chat box so I can catch up with you guys' questions. Stella, do you find that your umber is not quite going dark enough? Because that little bit of touch of blue will make a difference. It'll give it a little bit more depth. Okay, so the only other thing here is I felt like she needed a little more space between the upper lid crease and the brow. So I would just take a little bit of your white scumble and just bring that up a little bit to add a little more lift through here. So let's go ahead and go into the tonal adjustments. So when I do paint overs, what I'm looking for is your control of values and the value map that's kind of setting the stage for the color. And also I'm looking at edges, because even though edges don't need to be perfect at this stage, making sure that you have nice smooth transitions and nothing too hard of a line or a ridge that might distract or kind of punch through the color layer. Those are things I'm kind of thinking about when I look at the paint overs. So let's look at what I did on yours. So it looks like, let me get rid of the lines. One of the primary things I did was I just used tone to clarify the eyes. The eyes are really the focus of the portrait. So, even if it means you have to punch a little darker with that ultramarine and scumble a little bit of light into the whites of the eyes, it can really help to create some definition and an area of focus in the portrait. As it is right now, the eyes, nose, and mouth are kind of equal importance. So adding some clarity to the eyes and maybe some sharper edges and more defined edges is going to help, especially when you move into that color stage. So that's one of the things I did there. I also added a little bit more contrast for the iris. And then everything else, besides correcting the shape of the nose and defining a little bit in that dark nostril and adjusting the mouth, those were just drawing corrections. But tonally, the only thing I can think of is that you need to just scumble a little bit of light down the form of the face here. You don't want to go as heavy. You have a nice hierarchy of tone already. So just make sure that the veil that you apply is very, very thin as you move down into this area. And you don't need to bring it all the way to the edge of the shadow. You could stop it kind of around here, just kind of fade it out. And what that's going to do is give you this nice fall off of light, but there's still a sense that there is light here. And the same thing goes here on the right. I felt like she needed just a little more white. Let's see. A little more white kind of coming in this direction, but also I built up a little bit more of a mid-tone here. And you can either mix the umber with the white and get a value specific for that area that you want, although it will look a little more gray, it won't come out this warm. Or you could just do a thin glaze of the umber and just kind of feather it out this way to create more of that slow rounding of the form as it rolls across from the shadow edge. Let's see. I think I brightened up the forehead a little bit. You know, the jump between some of these areas, like here to here, are a little sudden. So you definitely want to carry your scumble and kind of connect the lights. Very similar to how you connect the body of the shadows. Look at for how the lights connect. It doesn't mean it doesn't get darker here. It usually does for that keystone shape, but it's a little more subtle. And actually, it's mostly that it's lighter here, and then it picks up light again here as the bridge of the nose starts to come out, and we have this shape here. So this will be a slightly darker plane, but you don't want a huge contrast there. And I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, lightening the side plane of the nose. Again, we're trying to reinforce the idea that our light source is coming from this direction. So you do have that hierarchy, but I think we want to also reinforce the sense of that rounding across this way. Think of the way Vermeer was able to do that in the lecture. We talked about that. So you already kind of have those hot spots. So what I want you to do is just soften out those transitions and think about any plane that is facing the light is going to be a little bit brighter. Okay, so that was it. You have a really nice underpainting started, so just work on a couple of those changes this week, and if you have any follow-up questions, just reach out to me in the forum. And again, next week, if you guys want me to take a second look, it won't be as in-depth, but if you want me to take a second look at your underpainting after you've made the changes during our next week's critique, I can go over it really briefly with you. But nice work. All right, Lynn. Are you in here, Lynn? Yes, you are. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at your drawing. So I'm going to just zoom in here a little bit. So first, let's look at the linear edits. I didn't really find all that much in the face. A lot of these lines that you see here, and hopefully you can see them. Let me duplicate that one here so it comes out a little stronger. So one of the things that I noticed, it was just hard to see where the side plane of the face was. So you might find that could be just because your umber has gone as dark as it can. So if you need to, add a little bit of ultramarine blue and the umber for the hair in the back, and try darkening that so that way you can define where the edge of the neck and the jawline is. And I just drew in where it is so that if you've lost it and you're drawing a little bit, that you can find it again. In the face, I think it was very similar. I just wanted to see a little more definition in the eyes. Again, making that darker value if you need it for the lash line, and make sure that your iris is not getting too big here on the left. I see your line coming out to about there. Let me switch colors again here. So your line is coming out to about here. It's kind of soft. I can't quite tell if that's officially where you've placed it, but just make sure it's not getting too wide. And if you found that you've gone too dark in the iris, in the illuminated part of the iris here, or you want to lighten it further and make it the pupil smaller, You can do a mixed value, mix the umber with the white to the right value for the reflected light in the eye, and you could just paint that in, and it might help you define that area a little bit more. When it came down to the nose, the only thing I saw was that your cast shadow could be a little wider here. Yeah, and that was pretty much it. It starts kind of behind the nostril here, and then so just bring it out to the right a little bit and round it out because it's more of a loop. And then in the mouth here, you're really pretty close. I noticed that your peak for the lips, at least based on the sketch, is kind of like right there. And hers are a little bit more to the right and centered. So make sure that you have this little peak kind of in line with that part of the nose, but on a slight diagonal, because remember, the muzzle has a roundness to it. And she's facing this way ever so slightly, so that center line is going to be a little bit pushed to the right. And then this got a little bit wide. I was thinking the whole mouth felt wide, possibly a little bit, so you might shorten that up just a little bit to about there, and then definitely shorten up this one, but where you have it ending is pretty close. It's just a little bit shorter on this diagonal. Where you have the bottom lip is perfectly fine. So let's talk about a little bit about the tonal. Sorry, I'm just catching your question. So can you use the blue in the underpainting? I would reserve it for only the deepest darks. So if your umber is just kind of limiting you, like in this case here, then yes, you can use it in the hair anywhere, or even in the pupils if you feel like you can't get dark enough with just the umber. That's perfectly fine. The only caution is you don't want any blue to start getting out into here because that's going to change the color shift. Only use it in those darkest areas. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the tonal changes. Erase some of my lines here. Okay, so I think for the most part, my tonal changes had a lot to do with correcting the drawing. Another thing I noticed is that the transition from the shadow here moving across the form, I felt like you could have a little bit more of a mid-tone here, especially because she's turning away from the light and we really want to reinforce that egg form of the head. So you have a nice strong shadow. I don't think you need to go darker with it, but you might consider pulling your glaze out or even mixing a value to go there. Stella, mix the blue with the umber, right? Yes, not straight blue, blue with the umber. It's just going to deepen it a little bit. And that's especially true if you have a very red umber. My brand is very red that I use. I think, I can't remember which one I'm using. It's either Gamblin or something. But some burnt umbers are very, very kind of cool, and some are very warm, and they kind of have different values. It really depends on the brand. So I would concentrate here on just pulling some of that tone over, and then I think I added, yes, I brightened up that white here in this section, because there's this shape here where it really catches the light. I did feel like you needed more of a soft shadow kind of radiating from the eye line there. And then I just went in with that darker shade, and you can see how that really added some definition for the lash line. Here, let me move this over so you can see. So I just took and basically clarified what you already have existing by adding a little bit more depth. The other thing I noticed is that this eyelid felt a little bit, just a little hard. So look at all of the midtone. Now this is one of the poses where she actually, it's not quite a shadow, but it gets really close. She has a very dark shape here and and a kind of middle dark shape there, and that is an underplane. So while it won't be as dark as maybe what you have over on the right, you might do a mixed brown or a very faint glaze there. That will give you a lot more depth in that eye socket. I can see you have a little bit of that there. Maybe it just needs to be pushed and softened a little bit, and then more of a highlight here on the height of the brow bone. So yeah, you can see I corrected the width of that eye, which you had out to there. So you had it out to about there. So just make sure you're keeping that in check. Look at the width of the whites of the eyes too. And that will help you keep that in focus. So I just kept the mouth pretty much the same other than those drawing edits. I just shaded that upper lip similar. And then I just focused on softening that transition. Because as you can see, you have it ending a little bit more abruptly. So just graduate that down a little bit, and same thing going across the form. There will be a little bit more of a pickup here because that plane faces the light source. There will be a small pickup here and here, but they will not be as intense as what you have in the upper cheek. Okay, so do you have any questions? There might be a little bit of a delay between. Okay, good. All right, perfect. If you do have any follow-up questions, Lynn, just let me know. And again, I'll be sending everyone the JPEGs again by email of the edits. So I'll send you the one with the lines and the tonal adjustments. Okay, Brenda. Are you here, Brenda? And by the way, I was really impressed with everyone's paintings. Even though they're slightly different, I feel like everyone captured some aspect of the model, something kind of unique. Lynn, you don't really need to worry about the clothing too much. I would just get a general dark tone and a little bit of a wash of the umber. You don't really need to render it out because we'll be doing that in color. Just like the basic shadow shapes, and then make sure it's just washed a little bit darker than her hair. Okay, perfect. All right, Brenda, let's go ahead and get started. So let's go over some of the line drawings first. You have a very close likeness of the model already, so a lot of these things are just minor tweaks. One of the first things we'll talk about is the outside layer or contour. I felt like the head shape was just a little off. It needs to be a little higher here at the top, and then a little bit more narrow here. And I understand because you have this light tone in the background that it might not be that easy to cover, but all you could take just a little bit of white and scumble over that. Let me do just that. Or you can try mixing a value. But even if you just lightly scumbled over it to fade it back, it won't show through once you get the underpainting, the first color layer on there. Also, let me get back to my ink. Also bring out the left side of the hair here. You can have it a little bit more of an interesting shape if you want. You can have it dip in, but maybe just not as severely. And then if we go into the face, I sketched these in white just because I thought it'd be a little easier to see, but let me go over that line real quick. Okay, so that's kind of the initial shadow shape on her face. And yours is really, really close to that. But there's just a few areas. I think you could open it up here and then make sure you have this little dip in the cheek there, because what that does is it kind of defines this egg shape that we have for the cheekbone. And also the hollow of the cheekbone is in here, so it gives us a sense of that form rounding. When we don't have it defined and it's just kind of the straight edge coming down, here's where you kind of have yours, it just becomes a little generic. And so if you get a little more specific there, that will help a lot. Looking here in the nose. Oh, sorry. I didn't realize that painted layer was on. So here we go. So bring that in a little bit. And then here on the nose, I felt like it was a little wide. So you can see that you have your width there, and the white lines here is about where they should be. And this was actually kind of a common issue. Yeah, the nemesis, your nemesis with the nose. It's okay. A lot of students have that issue with the width of the nose. One of the tricks I like to use is always looking at straight lines and seeing if I can find where it lines up. But sometimes that doesn't even do the trick, and we're also having this foreshortening of the nose as well. So all you need to do is take your dark color, and then you're going to tone it in. Here, let me get another layer here. So you're just going to color in a little bit, and also don't forget to tone in a little bit here, because it's not fully defined, this connection, and sometimes it's better just to have a little bit of a vague dark kind of fading in to the nostril, and then it won't feel like two holes in the nose. And that's always the trick with this upward angle. So with the eyes here, let's see. I felt like the eye was a little bit large on both of them. You can kind of sense that this feels very open, and I think all you need to do is actually bring this bottom up a little bit more quickly, and then shorten up where the tear duct is, and that will lock in the right size for the eyes. Same thing goes for this eye here on the left. I just felt like it needed to come in a little bit sooner and just push this. Now, it's not that you don't see a little bit of the underside here, and maybe that's what you are defining, but just push this section into the dark, into like a dark mass, and that will help to unify the eyes a little bit. Let's see. The eyebrow, just a quick fix, just scumble a little bit of white over that section here, just to raise that brow. I feel like your shape on this eyebrow was pretty spot on. Just this is the border of where her eyebrow is, so keep that in mind as you're scumbling some of your color. You might consider bringing your white all the way down, and maybe a little bit of a transition moving in that way. Your shadow shape for your nose is a little bit too much to the left, so you could mix a mid-tone and kind of paint over this section and help push it back to the white line. And let's see, with the lips, they're not too far off. It was more just getting the feeling of that shape. I get the feeling like you're pulling this down too much, but that could just be kind of an illusion with the tone. So just make sure you arc that lip a little bit. That line again. And then this bottom line, the little cast shadow under the lip needs to come up a little higher. And what that's going to do is open up the chin. And I think you had mentioned that you felt like the chin was a little small, and it is, but I think part of that is that you brought the shadow shape up too high, and then this got brought too low. So it definitely makes this distance feel too short. So by raising this little shape up and pushing that shadow down, you're going to open up that chin. So it's not that you were that far off, it's just those two little things kind of added up. Okay, so let's look at the tonal paint over. You've already kind of seen it, but I didn't realize it was turned on. Okay, take off. This layer here. Okay. Add all the eyes. Okay, so what I would suggest when you go in and edit the eye here, I'm going to actually do this as a live paint over this part because I forgot to do that part. So if you bring in the shadow a little closer and then take a little bit of white and just nudge that over, it's not a big distinction, but it will kind of add up and make a big difference in the long run. Move the lines here so you can kind of see what that did. And then look for where you can see the tear duct. Yeah, she has a little bit of light hitting in there, but you still want a little bit more of a defined edge there, so that way you can see where that membrane is and where the white of the eye is. And the same goes for this side. I would bring this down and just shorten it up by about that much, just push that into shadow. And that should help with that illusion of the eye. As far as the other tonal sections go, you can see what, let me zoom out actually, you can see what changing that shadow shape is going to do and how it elongates that chin a little bit, and also how getting the correct arc in the lip reinforces that upward feeling of looking at her from a lower vantage point, because we have this arc this way for the lip, and the opening of the mouth arcs that way as well. So you'll kind of get a sense for that. Why is it not drawing on the right layer? Oh, it's because I've got the wrong brush. That brush is just too soft. Sometimes it's hard for you guys to see. So this was the curve that I'm talking about. So since we're looking up at her, we've got this, this related curve across all the features. So you just want to make sure that it relates that way in the mouth as well. So I have that drawn out linear for you as well. So with the toning, I feel like it was more about building some of this transition, but also just brightening and unifying some of that light mask. So I think if you went over and scumbled one more time over the top, I'll show you where I did that arrow on. I'll have to find it and erase it so it's not too busy for you. But I would just work on broadening out some of that light across the form this way, but also keeping in mind that it gets darker as it wraps this way. So do you have any specific questions? I know a lot of these are just drawing corrections, so if you need to mix values to make those drawing edits, or if you're wanting to focus on getting the drawing before you worry about toning those areas, then that's fine. You can send it to me again midweek, and I can take another look and make sure the eyes are the right size and that you locked in the nose before we move into color. But let me know if you have any further questions. I must have drawn that on this layer. Okay. Is the nose too long? Which part of the nose? I didn't feel like once I made that correction to the position of the nose, mostly it was a width issue. I feel like the rest looks pretty good. Her mouth might be a little high. And actually, if I zoom back, I see what you're saying, but I wouldn't shorten the nose because it actually feels like it's a correct distance here. Let me grab my pencil again. So like if you look at your nose distance here to here, let me grab a color you can see. I'm all over the board today. Okay, so yeah, here to here, that seems pretty good. This distance does feel a little bit short. And this, now that we opened it up, it actually feels like you have room where you could move the mouth. So let me do a quick, this one, don't you just wish we could do this in our paintings? Let's see. I have to grab the right layer. So let's try just nudging that down just a hair. It's just a quick color to kind of show you. So yeah, you could probably nudge the mouth down just a tiny bit. Too bad it's not that easy to do, like what I just did where you basically cut it out and move it. But yeah, if you want to push it down a little bit, you definitely can. So I think it might balance it out just a little bit. And the main reason is because we did manage to create some more space for that chin. The shadow of the nose, okay, I see what you're saying. Maybe a little bit long on the right side. Probably cut it off around there. No, that's actually a little short. It's not by very much. Probably trim it around there. I would definitely work on locking in the nose first and the eyes, because that really plays a role in how you perceive the mouth. So when you begin your drawing corrections, start with the eyes, then adjust the nose. So shorten up the eyes, and that's going to influence and help you line up the nose, and then do the mouth last. And that little shift is going to make a big difference. All right, so if you have any follow-up questions midweek, just post in the forum with a picture of your updated painting, and I'll take another look at it. Oh, and you have a wonderful Easter too. Thank you for everyone for showing up today. I know some of you are having family functions today. I'm going for a dinner right after our class, so. All right, so I didn't pay attention. Randy, are you in here, Randy? All right, so let's go ahead and get started. If you're in here, just say hello. I know not everyone can make it. So I want to concentrate on some of the drawing edits here first. I'm noticing that there's a couple of things that would help in the beginning to fix, and that would be the width here in the back of the head. You want to bring it out a little bit more because it just makes her head feel a little tall. And also I would pull this out a little bit wider. Let's make that a little darker. And then in the face, I felt like it was partly the width of this eye that threw off some of the other features. So I would concentrate next on getting the correct width of this eye. If I move that you can see that the eye feels very, very wide, especially, I feel like your inner corner is pretty close, but that outer corner is a little bit big. So it should kind of end a little sooner. And then you're going to want to push the mouth to the left. That center line that exists here should hit right there on a slight curve. And that's going to help lock in her likeness a little bit more. And I felt like this shadow shape, I couldn't tell if it's because the shadow shape is so soft, but I felt like this could have been widened over a little bit because you had almost too big of a space here. Remove this here. The nose felt a little wide as a result, and I think it could have been linked back to lining up that nostril with the tear ducts. So I would focus on getting this eye locked in since it's the closest one to us and it plays such a big role in lining up the mouth. And then you can use that to help you line up the corners of the lips. If you look in the reference here, I did a line. I looked at this diagonal and then this line here. And if you look at where your current lip is, it's back in here. And it really should be towards the front of the iris. So I feel like your iris is actually in the right spot. So you just want to shorten up the eye towards the back. And then that means you'll kind of close off the lid, the crease, a little bit sooner and push this section into shadow. Pushing this crease, or the cupid's bow in the philtrum a little bit more towards the front, but also dropping this line. This is where you have your crease for the opening of the mouth, and it should drop down. And this corner needs to come down just a little bit off of this line. This is kind of where you have that line there, and it just needs to be, when you shorten it, just drop it a little bit quicker. When it comes to the contour of the face, you were pretty spot on, but I would bring this chin out because it feels like it sits back too far. And that's another thing that you can do. If you look here, I drew a line that where that indentation is for her chin, and it should line up with the corner of the mouth. It should be just outside of the tip of the nose or close to the eye. But I always try to relate it to something that's a little closer and easier to gauge. So using the corner of the mouth here, you want to bring that ball of the chin out. And then just trim this a little bit in. She had a little bit more of an empty space here before that fullness of the cheekbone. And you might fill out the brow bone just a little bit more. So those are some of the drawing edits. Now let's take a look at the tonal edits here. Okay, here we go. There was something I didn't realize. Hold on, I'm going to have to go back. So in your drawing, your eye actually was off. That was my mistake. I had this layer on, which I had actually moved the eye over. So you can see that new position for the eye. So where you had it before, your tear duct was over here, right in here, and it lined up almost exactly with the nose. But when you move it over, it actually closes that gap and makes the eye a little bit smaller. So you want to make sure your tear duct is lining up with the outside of that cat shadow. Alright, so let me erase that one there. So now we'll bring up some of the tonal adjustments. So once you get that eye positioned correctly, then you'll want to readjust your shadow shapes. And I feel like you have a good amount of light, but you could maybe brighten up select areas. As you can see here, I kind of applied just a kind of a veil of light moving across the form on the left side of the face, And I even highlighted a little bit here in this kind of triangle shape to really bring that forward. The moving the mouth is going to make a difference, but I would definitely concentrate on that right eye first. And darkening your cast shadows and just make them a little bit more clear, because right now they're a little vague. I can see this one and I can see this one, but knowing where your shadow is here, it's a little hard to tell. So just work on building up your contrast a little bit more. Okay, so that concludes everything, and I will send you a couple of these different layers by email. One where I move the eye, the other one where your original is. That way you can know exactly how much to move that, because that's really going to lock in her portrait. Alrighty, good work, and I look forward to seeing your painting develop. Okay, Tammy. Are you in here, Tammy? Okay, so let's bring up some of your drawing edits first. There really weren't that many. So let me zoom in here. So the first one that I noticed was just that the hair felt a little thin through this width here. So I would just bring this up and also keep it a softer edge. There will be an opportunity to soften the edges with the hair in the background when we start working in color, but one of the things you want to kind of avoid is these really hard, crisp lines, because sometimes they will show through a little bit. Luckily, our background is dark in the painting, so it'll be a little easier for us to mask that, but just when you're thinking about your underpainting, you want to keep those things in mind. So with the mouth, the only thing I saw was that this needed to come down, and it felt like your shadow dipped down a little bit too much there, so I would just scumble a little bit of light and bring that line up to about there. It's a subtle difference, but it'll help, again, with that kind of curve of the lip and capture her likeness. Your outside shape for the lip is spot on, but I thought it could benefit from maybe a little bit of a glaze for the shadow shape on her upper lip. You can see that in here. Kind of dances around like that. So putting in just a glaze of that darker shape is going to help reinforce that sense of the underplane. And then here in the eye is probably the biggest change. It was mostly that I felt like it was closing maybe a little too soon and that the tear duct was a little narrow. So as you can see, I moved the tear duct over to about here. Yours is kind of positioned in here. That's going to give you a little more space at the white of the eye, but also to really kind of round this out a little bit to where it feels the most open over the iris and pupil area. And then this is that underplane that's in shadow. So you'll see how I toned that in and made that correction tonally. So let's go ahead and move into that. So tonally, I think you're almost there. I do feel like you could unify your shadow with a little bit of a glaze on that cheek, and then work on building some more glazed transitions to really soften the forms. That way we don't have such a hard edge in some of these areas. It could be that your mid-tone is a little bit on the lighter side, so you didn't have as much room. So just pulling and feathering your glaze, like when you glaze out this shadow, kind of take a dry, clean, soft brush and feather it out and see if that helps to create a little bit more of a nuanced transition. On this right eye here, I noticed that the tear duct felt a little bit long, so I corrected that tonally just by pulling that shadow in a little shorter and pulling the white up in here, because it kind of dances in and connects to that upper lid. And then on this left eye here, you can see that all I did was put in a little bit of tone, a darker tone for that underplane to help define that inner shelf for the upper lid. And so like right in here. And that really helped to get the eyes to pop a little bit more and look a little more like her. Oh, and I put in that glaze for that lip. So you can see that, and brought up the white here just a little bit to even out that lip shape. And that's really going to help you lock in her likeness. Outside of that, everything else looks great. So I think I don't think you need to go in and hit any other areas with white. Your transitions look beautiful here. The only one is maybe that one moving across the cheek. Just to build that a little bit softer. You could go in a little brighter, maybe down in here. I think I added some there. Yeah, but I think this transition up here looks great because I get a sense of those two planes. Do you have any questions? Oh, you're very, very welcome. Yeah, great work. All right, Penny, you are up if you're still with us. Well, if you get any questions, Tammy, just post it in the forum with a picture or once you've made your edits, and I'll get back to you. And everyone, again, you guys have an opportunity to have me take a final look next week as well. Okay, so let's take a look at, I don't know if I did any drawing edits on this. I think everything felt like it was in the right spot. But all the work I did was tonal, Penny. So I think your drawing is really spot on, but I do feel like it looks a little bit flat, like you need a little more dynamic range. My feeling looking at your imprimatura is maybe that this tone ended up a little bit light, so it didn't give you as much range in the midtones as maybe you could have gotten with a slightly darker imprimatura, and that's perfectly fine. It's just limits on how much white you can kind of carry over, because now that it's this value, the midtone's kind of sitting here. So all that means, though, is that we just need to glaze a little bit more dark moving over. So here, let me pull this up here. So just to give you an idea of the areas I added tone, I'm going to just show you the layer. So this is my paint over. So this just gives you an idea of where I'm actually making the changes. And you can see I'm not really adding a lot of white. I'm mostly adding more of those mid-tones. So I think that's really where your painting will develop the most. So you can see that the difference that it makes by adding just a little more of that graduation of that middle value. There's a few ways you can achieve that. You could mix a value. It's going to be a little bit more gray, but you could take your umber and just add a little bit of white and then use that kind of in a glaze or a scumble and pull that into these areas here. And look for where those midtones pull in for the forms. Like there's this pull kind of here. There's a little bit of a pull here. There's a little bit along here. So you might consider mixing a value if you feel like doing the glaze just of the straight umber is going to be too harsh, because that can be hard to be delicate with. And then same thing in here. I wanted you to define a little bit of that cheekbone depression, and that I would just definitely mix kind of a gray using the umber and white, and then just lightly scumble. So the same technique that you're using with the white where you're applying it very thinly, you can do that and just feather in some of those midtones. that forehead should feel like it's getting just a little bit darker as it pulls over to the right. I really didn't do much else in terms of the drawing goes. I did add a little bit of mid-tone leading out from the bridge. I softened because there's this form here on either side that is that plane that's shifting from the bridge of the nose. So on this far right side, you should have a little bit of a mid-tone there. And this tone is too light to kind of stand out for that. So just concentrate on adding your midtones and your drawing is going to lock in. One thing I wanted to note about the neck was that it felt a little harsh and bright. The neck, even though sometimes it can feel really, really bright to our eyes, because it's usually more pale, it doesn't get as much sun, it doesn't have as much coloration as the face, what can happen is we overemphasize how bright it is. And so you put it in really, really bright, and then there's this really hard, dark shadow. But if you really concentrate on the neck and squint your eyes, the light mass here is probably no brighter than here. It's just a different color. It's a little cooler. And it also is a very limited kind of spot. Everything else is darker. And that's what makes this feel so bright, is that it's surrounded by all this dark. So it's that kind of relative contrast. So what I would suggest is building more midtones in that neck, and also build a little bit of a transition tone along the cast shadow edge, because even though cast shadows are a harder edge, the further they get from the source casting the shadow, the softer the edge gets. And also you can see that it is kind of a haloed soft edge because I had a diffused light on our model, so that cast shadow edge is going to be a little bit softer. But you can see what a difference having that mid-tone there has made. And also same thing wherever you have like a hard edge for the hair, just make sure you build in a few transitional mid-tones to keep it from pulling the eye, because we want to keep the concentration up here in the portrait. Yeah, and again, next time you do a process similar to this, try going a little bit darker with your ground, with your imprimatura. Maybe not quite as dark as this, but you can start this dark as you have in the shirt here. But maybe somewhere in between these. I basically, when I'm toning, sometimes I'll start with a very dark ground, and we did this in my tonal painting class. We started with a very dark ground, and then built up more lights. But when I'm looking at my photo reference, what I try to aim for is either a value that's close to the reflected light, or a value that's close to the darkest mid-tone for my underpainting, for my imprimatura. So when you're looking at your photo reference, you want to identify those areas and try to make your imprimatura either one of those, because you can always build more white. It's the hardest part is actually getting those subtle midtones. Okay, so good work. If you have any do you have any questions? Yeah, those midtones are kind of tricky too, because the umber is transparent. It's a little harder to control, in terms of getting a smooth gradient. You might try using like a stiff bristle brush. Also the ivories, if you bought those, or the opals, those work as well. But I tend to use like an older one because I kind of scrub it into the surface, and that helps me get kind of that sfumato, soft, feathered edge. And just a very dry brush, almost like you're just dry brushing it on and kind of staining the surface. And if it goes down too dark or too heavy, a great tip is to use Q-tips. And you can just kind of blot along the edge, and it'll take up some of that tone, or you can rub it off, kind of like a reductive method. And that's one way you can kind of stain the area and then remove and get a little bit more of a graduation. Yeah, the eyelash shadows, I didn't see that when I was photographing her until I had uploaded them onto my computer. One thing I would do is if you're going to create a cast shadow, which you will want some, a little bit of one, a soft one, I would not have this area be lighter. Let me just do a quick paint over and I'd show you how I would treat it. That's a good question because it is kind of a tricky area. So what I would do is pick the gray that is in the darkest part, and I would just kind of unify that shadow a little bit, something like that. That way, and I would have it actually go maybe just a touch darker as it gets right next to that lid, so that creates that softer effect. So that's how I would approach it in my painting. I wouldn't really even worry about the definition of the eyelashes. You could put that in, but I'd probably personally just simplify that just a little bit. You can have a suggestion of it, but maybe just keep it a little bit softer. And that's how I would treat it in my painting. That's a great question because I realize it's kind of confusing. But when you step back, that's what matters with our painting. We want our painting to read when we step away from it, especially. And of course we want the details there, but we don't want details to become a distraction when you step back or to create confusion in the light logic. So that's where like overemphasizing reflected lights or a little detail like that where you might have emphasized that little bit of light leaking in between her eyelashes, you can see that this actually reads better than the photograph. So that's a little bit of artistic license, and you just choose what to include and what to exclude. Yeah, she doesn't really have too many highlights in the eyes here. She has a little bit, and you can indicate some of them. Sometimes if I photograph my models and I don't have a highlight in the eye, I find it just needs a little bit of something. I will actually think about the direction of the light source and I would maybe add just a hint, or maybe an overlap of something, just to add a little glisten to the eyes. I don't always do it because it can be really hard to fake, but if I feel like it needs it, then I will add something like that. But one that you can really emphasize is this one here on that inner rim. And if she did have a highlight, it would be actually kind of towards the top here, in there. Same for that one. But invention is very hard, and you have to really think about where that light is coming from and make an educated guess. All right, beautiful work. I look forward to seeing your painting. Oops, I didn't look at the name. Alexandra. So it is your turn. You have a really lovely likeness of the model here. Let's see. I didn't have actually any drawing edits for this one. I think everything was just tonal, and I think it's very similar to Penny's, where you need to actually just add a little bit more mid-tone. So let's go ahead and pull that up. Yeah, it's just a gradual transition, and you can see how it creates this lovely softness across this form going this direction. Pen again. So yeah, getting that soft graduation across the form this way. Because our light is coming in at this diagonal, it is hitting the strongest here. So it's going to kind of fade off in this direction. So that's kind of how you see that mid-tone falling off across the light falling off across the face. The only other change I made, other than adding just more mid-tone under here, I did open up and simplify the cheek or the jawline here because there was a little bit of a dip there. It was just a little exaggerated, so I would just open that up a little bit. And then adding more contrast in the eyes. If you need to go a little darker with your umber, just start to define a little bit more in the pupils, add some highlights, and that's pretty much it. think it looks great. You're a really nice likeness. Just work on those softer edges and a little more definition. If you have, excuse me, if you have any follow-up questions, just post them. Oh, and another thing is same thing here in the neck. Just be careful making this so bright. That value, it's somewhere like that almost. Yeah, so it shouldn't be much brighter than like this area on the face here. And even then it's just kind of in a limited spot, and I tend to play it down just a little bit. So you might consider doing that as well. But really nice work. I think once you get some more midtones in there, you'll be all set to move into color. Now Stella, are you in here still? Now Stella had changed and decided to do a portrait of her own, a different reference. She'd started a drawing earlier, so she had to play a little bit of catch up, but I didn't get a chance to do the paint over fully, so I'm going to kind of do it live here, because I don't see that much. It's just a couple of tonal shifts and things I think you can push. First off, are you going to keep the background as dark as it is in the photo, or are you going to kind of go with like a really dramatic black? Or do you plan on keeping it a little bit lighter? Because that's going to kind of influence how I proceed here. Rembrandt dark. Okay, so if you're not going to go even straight black and you want it maybe like a value step up from that, maybe something still rich. And it could even, now Rembrandt would often do a gradient, so you can consider doing something that might help on this side. I'm painting over the photo just so you can kind of visualize what you could do. But oftentimes one of the things that Rembrandt did was use silhouette to get the figure to jump forward. So you'll often notice that if there's any kind of gradient or lighter area, it's often on the shadow side of the head. So that can be used to your advantage here, and you can have the hair shape. It might be a little guesswork for you on where that sits, but my guess would be something like that. And so then I would just do like a very, very soft kind of graduation out from there. And it can be really close in value, just a little bit lighter, and that's going to help her stand forward quite a bit. So my suggestion would be get your background in your imprimatur, just because it is so dark in the reference. Get it really, really nice and dark in your underpainting. So I would say start to build that up. Even if you have to paint a little thicker, you don't need to go black, but go a little bit darker than what you have, because that's going to set the contrast for the figure. In fact, if you went in with maybe something like that, then you can see how going in even darker for the hair on that far side is going to give you a whole different range, even for the shadow here on the face. So everything's going to probably need to get darker, which is going to help your lights pop a little bit more. I can't quite tell. You might need to go a little lighter, but I would wait until you get those nice dark contrasts before you go in and build up some of those lights. Her lips feel a little bit small, just a tiny bit. She has a very full bottom lip. So, and it feels like her chin in your drawing might be a little bit small. So my suggestion would be You get a feel for that spacing. Maybe open up your bottom lip a little bit here. You might just drop that line. You have her likeness, but it almost just feels a little bit small. She needs that fuller. She has quite full lips, even though they're kind of a different shape. So try shifting that down just a tiny bit, and that's going to lock in her likeness. You don't want this spacing to get too small, too. So that might actually help if you drop the mouth just a tiny bit, because it'll drop this a little as well. If it's still feeling a little bit short, you might end up moving this shadow here. Let me zoom in so you can see a little better. This shadow a little higher. Pick a dark that you can see. So just bump that in a little sooner, and then just raise this. It's a very small amount, but it will kind of add up in the long run, especially if you shift the mouth down a little bit and you shift the nose up a little bit. It's going to lock in. I feel like you have her eyes, and your shadow shapes feel pretty good. So I would definitely just, other than the mouth and the nose, just concentrate on getting that background dark and setting up the contrast, because that's the only way you're going to get her to feel so brilliant in both color and also value. You do have some nice graduated values on this side. If you do add white on this side, it will just be in a couple of limited spots or just a very thin veil. But I think you're pretty close to the right value as it is. You will just want to build up these areas brighter. But lights are hard to judge if you don't have your darkest darks established, and that's always why I start with my darkest masses. So I think if you start there, you're on your way. And you can post an update once you get that nice and dark. If you want, I can kind of send this whole picture to you so you can see what I did with the background here. It's just a suggestion, but I find it works really well for getting the figure to pop forward. You might consider adding blue to the umber. Yeah. Sometimes, also because you're going to go kind of cool gray, it might not hurt to have that a little bit cooler. But I would refrain from doing too much of that in the face, with the exception of the pupils, maybe. But in here, you want to keep that really, really warm. In this section, it is just such a rich brown that I think you'll want to keep that as warm as possible. Yeah, you've got some really lovely colors in here. This is going to be really nice. You can see, especially on redhead complexion models, you'll see a lot of grays and kind of these cooler tones. They become more obvious on the skin, so you can see those really nice transitions there. So that's going to make for a nice painting color-wise. So, do you have any other questions? All right, perfect. I look forward to seeing this one develop. It's a great model. Okay, Marianne. Oh, you're very welcome. Stella, do you know the model? I mean, is that someone you know? Is it your relative, or is it you? It always makes it easier sometimes, you know, when you're painting someone you know. She's your daughter's friend. Yeah, she makes for a great model. Sometimes you just find those people. I mean, it just so happens that I've painted my niece a million times, because she just, especially at this one age where she was kind of just starting to lose that kind of baby look, you know, and she just had this this look that reminded me a lot of Waterhouse, and I love Waterhouse and some of the models that he used. And so I've painted her several times, and sometimes you just find someone that's just striking, and you can't help yourself. You just want to kind of paint them over and over again. So I could see a series coming out of her. She's really interesting. Okay, so let me catch up on the question. Marianne, so you misunderstood, thought we were supposed to put in the shadows and lights. You didn't indicate the cheek rolling. Oh, okay. Oh yeah, she does, huh, Stella? Okay. So Marianne, don't worry about that. It's okay. Like I said earlier, I don't know if you tuned in when this first started, but you have all week to develop this painting. We won't be touching it with color for a little while, so feel free to take your time and build up those midtones. And I'll still go over my paint over, and it's mostly that. It is mostly just tonal. So this is just going to give you an idea of what you can do. You can either mix a value or you can do this with glazes. But mostly I found that it's building up that darker tone, very similar to the last few paintings. Mostly what you want is to build those transitions. And if you find it easier to mix a middle value to use there, you can do that. Or you can re-wet some of the edge here with umber, almost like a glaze, and then feather it out with a dry brush. And pay attention to where the kind of midtones kind of branch across and connect. There's a little bit of one here, for example. It doesn't have to be this smooth in terms of texture because you're going to be working with paint and this is a digital program, but this gives you a little bit of an idea. And you might consider glazing your shadows down. Just another coat will help even this out and also make it just a little bit more deep in contrast. Because of the angle that you're painting with this model, she has a lot of mid-tone in here, and I feel like, and also actually in this eye on the right. So I want you to go ahead and also scumble those midtones into these areas as well and create those soft transitions. There weren't any drawing corrections that I saw. Really, it was just a matter of building up those midtones. And again, in the neck, that's going to make a big difference too, being able to build that form. In this angle, you really get a sense of that cylindrical feeling to the neck here. You see that highlight riding up this part of the column and everything kind of fading to dark in this direction. The brightest point is actually here, and I see that you put that there, but you might find that you end up toning that back or leaving it, maybe leaving it and then just building your lights a little brighter in other areas. But you will want to build those midtones up the neck. Yeah, I know, and a lot of my suggestion for everyone was in the drawing stage, not to include her eyeshadow in your linear drawing, to kind of try to stick to the shadow edges. But as far as midtone goes, now is where you can start to define that dark shadow. Just what you see here, that's the value you want to put there. So it's pretty straightforward. The philtrum, let's see. Well, yours is just a little straight. The philtrums should kind of start where the nose ends, where the septum of the nose is, and it usually is more of a shape like this. So if you just take a little bit of light and you trim this, it's almost like a little bit of an upside down kite shape. That's going to help. It doesn't always need to be as defined. I don't even think I went in and adjusted it. And then your dip in the lip, I would just make that a little more clear where that is. So maybe look for where you can add a highlight. I feel like it's in line, pretty close. But maybe just define it a little more clearly. Look at where she has a little pickup of light here and a pickup of light here. And this is her philtrum shape. It's kind of like, actually on her, yeah, something like that. So make sure you get that curve. And it's not real light all the way up. You can see that in this top portion, it starts to get a little bit more mid-tone. The light actually kind of rides up in that section. So maybe it's that you have, yours just looks a little boxy. And then your line, maybe you need to add a little more light right over here just to define where that peak is for the Cupid's bow here. I can see it from the line work. Let me take off my, yeah. So I think you have it in the right spot. It's just the philtrum feels a little off-center from the lips. The center of the top lip, you know, it seems really close. Let me just do a quick check for you though. Let me remove my paint over. No, I think you're pretty good. Now this side feels a little asymmetrical from this side, so that could be what you're sensing. You could move this side over. Just, I mean, it's a very small amount there, but just change that curve a little bit, and I think it'll help. But where you have this dip there, feels like it's in line. It should hit around there. Your nose feels like it's in the right spot. So nothing major. So just take a look. Lynn, to answer your question, you can, I don't do it that way, but I'm just saying for those who have really major drawing corrections to make, it's going to be the easier way to make those drawing corrections. But if you don't have many major drawing corrections to make, and you're just trying to add more white or add more tone, stick to that scumbling and glazing technique. So, for example, in this one, she could actually glaze a little darker in the shadow and then feather and pull that glaze out, and it would probably be fine. But if she had a really, if she brought her shadow out here and needed to push it back, she could scumble, but you might still have this line. So it might be easier to mix a correct value for that area and paint more opaquely to cover that up. So it just kind of depends on the situation. You're very welcome, Marianne. Do you have any questions? I'm glad you guys find the critiques helpful. It's a great program for doing something like this. I use this program for sketching quite often. Oh, good. I'm glad. Thank you, Stella. I'm really happy. So the new videos are available. I don't know if any of you watched them. There are 4 to 5. And the first one is the color theory one. That's just a little bit like the one where we talked about Vermeer. It's a lecture. And it's just, we're going to talk about skin tones and, you know, using kind of what we know about color theory to help us mix skin tones. And then we'll get into actually mixing the colors for our painting and doing a color study. So. Does the area on the cheek above the neck look like a tumor? Let's see, the area on the cheek. Let me look. Do you mean this area right here, this little thing right here? If you mean that spot there, then you could just kind of smooth that out. Nothing else is really jumping out at me. Once you feather these edges, the shadow shape is going to make more sense. Yeah, I could see what you were doing there. Let me see. You know, it's going to end up so dark, I wouldn't worry too much about it. What you could do, though, is just clarify this angle change. Just take some of the dark from the hair and push it in and make that a more clear shape. Maybe push it in a little bit. Okay, alrighty. Well, thank you everyone. I hope you guys have a lovely weekend, and I will get these out to you by tonight. I have a little bit of a family function to go to right after this, so but I will get these emailed out to you guys by this evening so you can begin working on your corrections. In the meantime, just work on watching the videos. Oh, did you find that helpful? Yeah, it's a great diagram. I can't take credit for it, but I use it in my workshops a lot because it's a very comprehensive diagram on how to photograph models, but also how to think about lighting for your paintings. So it's really, really helpful. All right, thank you guys, and have a lovely weekend, and I'll see you in the forums. Oh, you guys are all very welcome. It's a pleasure to have you all in class. All right, we'll see you next week.